Hi, everybody. It is April the 20th, and today we are talking about the Vietnam War. So, this is one of the more important things that we have to discuss. I'd like to start off by saying grades have been updated this morning. Emails have gone out to all parents, and we're at about 73% student engagement. So 27% of my students have turned in nothing, have no evidence of subscribing to the YouTube channel or of getting out of bed. I don't know if I don't know what they're doing. They may be in a coma for all I know, and I hope that's not the case. So if you are aware of other people in our classes who aren't doing anything, just have them give me a message saying they're okay. We are trying to encourage student engagement. The email today described the district's perspective on grades. It described the way I'm handling that. Every teacher is given a great deal of autonomy in how they're going to deal with grades in this remote learning phase. So check out that email. If you have specific questions, email me at kbaker@ecusd7.org. So the AP students also should check out that email I sent to parents, and have hopefully you've already gone to the College Board website. You are aware that it is a home test nowadays, and I think that's in your favor. So I encourage you to take the test. Okay, on to Vietnam. So if you're following along on the Edmodo slides, move on to slide 4. You know what mercantilism is, a belief that a positive balance of trade makes a nation strong. And after World War I, Woodrow Wilson had this idea, including 14 points, about indigenous people, native people, local people having control over local issues. That there should be some form of autonomy for those people around the world who live in a certain place. Well, the British and the French obviously disagreed in the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and although Ho Chi Minh himself was at the Treaty of Versailles Conference, the French told the Vietnamese to get back to work. It's going to be mercantilism as normal. So, after World War II, Ho Chi Minh kind of insisted that the French go home and leave Vietnam to the Vietnamese. That makes him a nationalist, someone who promotes their own country and doesn't want to be interfered with by others. Vietnam for the Vietnamese is what he wanted. And the French said, lol, no, it's mercantilism. And so the French began to resist. The Vietnamese began to resist the French. Who in their right mind is going to help the Vietnamese people fight against a Western mercantilist? Well, it is the middle of the Cold War. I have a cat who is intruding, just the way the French intruded in Vietnam. This is Mordecai. Everybody say hi, Mordecai. Mordecai is my cat. He loves me specifically. We have a very good relationship. Right, buddy? Watch. No, he's not going to do it. He's looking at you today. He's more interested in you than me. All right. Well, anyway, the Vietnamese decided to ask the Russians for help. Who's going to give the Vietnamese weapons to fight against a Western mercantilist during the Cold War? Well, the answer seems to be the communists. So the Vietnamese agree to become communist in order to get weapons to reject Western mercantilism, which of course put the Vietnamese in a subordinate economic relationship with the French. And in 1954, the French lose the Battle of Dien Bien Phu to the communist forces of the Vietnamese. So I just want to point out that yes, it is true that the Vietnamese became communist, but that was only in response to French mercantilism. The Vietnamese didn't wake up one morning and say, doggone it, I think communism sounds great. That is not the case. They were nationalists at heart. And, if we go to Vietnam today, you'll find they are still ostensibly communist, but it seems to be working out for them. Vietnam is one of the top vacation spots in the world, and the Vietnamese are economically stable, at least until this current event. So in 1954, when the French lost the Battle of Dien Bien Phu to the Vietnamese, the Russians and the Americans both said, well, it's a divided world. There's only two superpowers, as Dean Acheson said. And the Geneva Conference in 1954 split Vietnam in half, just as Korea had been split in half. This is, unfortunately, the same thing that Solomon had to do. You know, two women brought the baby before Solomon, and they both said, it's my baby. He said, let's cut it in half. And one of the women said, no, don't kill my baby. And so obviously it was her baby. But both Russia and America were like, yeah, fine, cut the baby in half, as long as it's good for us. So Vietnam was cut in half, and America controlled South Vietnam as a proxy country, and Russia controlled North Vietnam as a proxy country. That will, of course, set the stage for a proxy war between North Vietnam and South Vietnam, with the support of America and Russia on their own respective side. I went outside today. My allergies are just killing me. If you go on to slide number 7 on Edmodo, we're on the file that says Chapter 31. Hopefully you found that. The United States will openly aid the South because of the Truman Doctrine and the Domino Theory. And the communists of Russia will openly support the North because they have predicted that communism will cover the world. It really is their desire to do so. This ideological difference is what's going to promote the Vietnam War. So there are really two causes to the Vietnam War. One is the ideological divide between Russia and America. And the second is the French not giving the Vietnamese any form of control over their own country. After the Treaty of Versailles Conference saw Wilson promoted, and after World War II, the Marshall Plan helped Europe get back on its feet with local control. The same with Japan. We eventually turned Japan over to the Japanese. But the French weren't going to do that. And so I blame them for a lot. The French kind of messed this up. If you disagree, you're welcome to leave a comment. So Eisenhower is the first to send military advisors. He sent 675 of them in 1960. Kennedy will increase these advisors to 16,000. Now, 16,000 is a little bit more than an advisory role. These soldiers are actually fighting against communist North Vietnamese who are infiltrating the South in an attempt to overthrow the government. So something weird happens during the Kennedy administration of the early 1960s. In order to create a democratic South Vietnam, the Kennedy administration supports the installation of a puppet dictator who is Catholic. As we know, Kennedy's Catholic, and America picks a guy who's Catholic in Vietnam. This is Ngo Dinh Diem. And Ngo Dinh Diem began trying to convert the South Vietnamese to Catholicism, which doesn't go over very well in a Buddhist country. And so Buddhist monks actually immolate themselves. They burn themselves. This picture is an image of a protesting monk who sat down on a street and set himself on fire in protest to Ngo Dinh Diem trying to convert the South Vietnamese to Catholicism. And so it's pretty clear that Ngo Dinh Diem is not going to work out as a dictator. And so Kennedy tells the American troops, give the South Vietnamese 24 hours. Go back to your barracks. We're going to look the other way, and we're going to let the South Vietnamese solve this problem. And so with American troops not actually stopping it, the South Vietnamese take this prompting seriously, and they assassinate Ngo Dinh Diem. They remove him in a military coup, and he is killed. We're going to skip flexible response this year. It's more of it's something that we can discuss in class, but without your interaction. We're going to move on to slide 15. So in 1964, Lyndon Johnson is President of the United States. And the war has continued to escalate, to grow bigger and bigger. America is sending more and more troops. Kennedy has been killed, and Lyndon Johnson is now president. And while he wanted to create the Great Society, let's not forget, Lyndon Johnson wanted to create what he called the Great Society. He signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965. He really is concerned about voting, civil rights, and trying to eliminate an unfair system racially in America. But he is massively distracted by Vietnam. There's this story about Lyndon Johnson going to the basement of the White House and looking at a map of North Vietnam and selecting bridges to be blown up the next day by the Air Force. That's a little bit detailed for the President of the United States. That's the kind of thing he should be delegating to someone else. The Vietnam War eventually consumed Lyndon Johnson. He did not deal with it very well. It was a constant distraction to him. And so Lyndon Johnson is going to, unfortunately, suffer with the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which is going to be the one big homework thing this week. The Gulf of Tonkin incident is something that may have happened, and it may not have happened. We have a mythology in American history surrounding the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And it's not like the Pueblo. In the Korean War, after the Korean War, we were spying on the North Koreans, and they captured one of our ships. They held the prisoners. They held the crew prisoner for about a year. And that's a thing that is objectively true. In fact, the USS Pueblo, our ship, is still in North Korea to this day. It is their largest tourist site inside North Korea. North Koreans travel to see that ship that was captured by the North Koreans as a demonstration of their success over the United States. But the Gulf of Tonkin incident is a time where U.S. warships are said to have been attacked by North Vietnamese patrol boats. There are reports that it happened. There were shots that were fired, but were those shots actually fired at American vessels? So, Google the Gulf of Tonkin incident. The Gulf of Tonkin incident is what puts us into a position where the President of the United States gets to actually send combat troops to Vietnam in an almost unlimited manner. In fact, it's why we have the War Powers Act today. The War Powers Act is a congressional response to the Gulf of Tonkin incident. So after the Gulf of Tonkin, the Congress passes a resolution saying that we can send troops, the president can send troops to Vietnam as needed. That gets a little bit out of hand. And so we create the War Powers Act. The War Powers Act says that the president can only use troops overseas for 30 days without congressional approval. Well, clearly we are not using troops overseas. We are using troops overseas for more than 30 days. Why doesn't anyone invoke the War Powers Act and stop the president from sending troops overseas without congressional approval? Well, it is likely that the War Powers Act is unconstitutional. And so it's a Schrodinger's piece of legislation. It's in place and it's real until it's not. And if you try to enforce it, it's likely going to be declared unconstitutional. So it both exists and does not exist at the same time. It's in a hyperposition like that. We're going to stop here, but I would encourage you to Google the Gulf of Tonkin incident and send me a paragraph explaining the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And at the end of that paragraph, I'd like you to tell me, did the attack happen or did it not happen? This is a touchstone of U.S. history. This is one of those foundational moments around which an entire generation sees their experience happen. The Gulf of Tonkin incident is really what causes all the problems that we see concerning the Vietnam War in the late 60s with so many troop deaths. We'll talk about more Vietnam tomorrow and how it plays out. But there was a way back from Vietnam until the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And after that, there is no way back. And in fact, we failed to craft an exit strategy, and we eventually simply leave Vietnam to the North Vietnamese. And Nixon calls it peace with honor, but the reality is we took our football and we went home and we stopped playing in the third quarter. I hope that you look up the Gulf of Tonkin incident. I hope you discuss it with your parents or your siblings or your cat. I'll speak with Mordecai about it later. And send me an email at kbaker@ecusd7.org and check out that parent email I sent today. I hope you have a wonderful week. The weather's going to be great.